Visited my YouTube channel. You might want to validate that this is indeed streaming. Sometimes there's some quirks and it doesn't stream. All right. So today's topic is an introduction to CSS. You might already be familiar with CSS. I just want to make sure we all have a baseline understanding of CSS, and perhaps maybe learn a thing of two that you might not be familiar with. All right, so basically what we did last week, we only talked about HTML, yes? We didn't look at how to style it, how to make things bigger, smaller, give it color or background or any of those things. And it used to be that when you develop HTML, you would also develop the look and feel, right? You would make some fonts bold or italic or underlined, or you might provide the styling right there in the HTML, right? And this quickly became very hard to maintain. If you know later on your company needed to change its look and feel, right? Needed to change the color scheme. You would have to visit every single page and edit, right? You have to change all the look and feel. So they were looking for other mechanisms, and what they one of the mechanisms is to use CSS, cascading style sheets. Meaning these are styling rules, right? That you can take an HTML document and then and the footers and whatnot, right? I want to color them with a background yellow or blue or whatever, right? Instead of embedding them in the HTML, right? Instead of embedding it, look and feel inside the HTML, we took it out, right? So the architecture might look something as follows, right? You have instead of having the styling right on your HTML, instead of having the styling right here, embedded in here, what we did is that we broke it into several documents. The HTML, if we have it inside of the HTML, the problem is that if you have lots of these HTML, right, then you are repeating the work of styling it across many pages, yes? And that makes it a maintenance nightmare. Instead, what we did is that, well, they all should look more or less the same, right? They all have maybe the same header, the same color scheme and whatnot, right? Instead of repeating it over and over the HTML, let's have a separate document, right? And where we grab all those rules, right, that says that, heading 1 should be red and that the paragraph should be green and all those, right? All those styling rules, we're going to break that copy out of here and put it in the CSS, right? And then link these things together so that all these documents would refer to styling. Says, hey, I have no styling, I have no style. He has the style, right? So the browser, what it does is it downloads both the HTML and the CSS. It starts rendering the HTML and then applies all these rules saying that H1 is red, right, and P is blue and whatnot, right? And it applies all these rules on the elements. That makes sense, right? And since this file is shared across all the pages, this is much easier to maintain, right? The scale is much better. You only have one single page, one single place of maintenance, right? What this style sheet. Make sense? All right. So that's more or less the architecture. The way the styling works is that you can either apply the rules. Now this is what is called a rule, where you say, I want to change the property of a particular property, like a color or background or whatever, right? Or the font or the font weight. I want to apply this property. I want to change it to, and then some value, right? So this is the property I want to change, and this is the value I want to set it. If you have many properties that you want to change, you separate them using semicolons. Now, this syntax can be applied in several places. It could be applied at least in 3 places. One, it can be applied directly on the element, right, which is considered to be bad practice, right? Basically, you're going back to the original architecture, right, where you would style specific elements right there in the documents, right? The other alternative is to apply this in the style elements, right? You have a dedicated style element at the page, right? Where you can put your rules, right? That's a little better, right? Because you can create rules that can apply to many different elements on the same page, right? You can create rules that are reusable across the page. But the better solution is to completely take it out of the page and put it in a separate file. Okay, and that's that's the way you should go. Definitely for our assignments, for homeworks, for our projects, right? Definitely, I do not want to see styling at the element level, right? Or even at the style element, right? It has to be in a separate CSS file. Okay. Right. All right. So let's start up here an example. Let's create here a directory. Oh, I need to stop this. Wait, it's running. Excuse me. I'll create a directory here. I'll call it CSS. And in here, I'm going to create a little HTML page. We'll call it 000.css.html. There it is. All right. Okay, so let me close this. So if I have a header, right, h1 hello world, by default it uses the styling that hello CSS. It uses the styling that is default by the browser. All right, so let's run that. So there it is, hello world, and the default is to use a font Times New Roman. The color of the font is black. The background is white. Also notice that there's some padding around the document. You can right-click on the document and use inspect elements. Right? This is a very useful tool that most browsers have that allows you to look at the document. Right? Let me. You can put it to the right-hand side or to the bottom, and it allows you to inspect the document. Right? Very in nitty-gritty detail. Right? So, for instance, one of the things that I can do is that if I inspect this, it says, yeah, at the top is the document, right, as the browser has interpreted, right? You see the top there, right? This is what the browser is interpreting, the way it's interpreting. This is called this representation here. Notice that it's a hierarchical representation. It's called the DOM, or Document Object Model, right? It has, the browser has its data representation, right? It's data model of what it's rendering. Yes, it's a data model. It's called the Document Object Model. Okay, right? Where you have several elements that are hierarchical, right? We have the parent HTML, which is parent to two elements, the head and the body. There they are. If you open up the head, you see there's a title, and also there's a body, and the body in there has H1, just a hello world. Make sense? And I can navigate through this. If I click on any one of these, all right, notice that below that is the styling that it is currently applying on those elements, right? If you click on them, like I'm clicking on an H1, at the top it says what is the hierarchy of where are you. Notice that if I hover, right, it tells me how it's rendering, right? What rectangle, what piece of the area it's being taken up by that element. Okay, right? If I hover over body, that's the body. Notice that the body has a white margin around it. You see that? By default, the body has a margin. Here's H1. Notice that H1 seems to be the blue, right? Notice that there's a blue, and then there's like a salmon color, right? These are the salmon is like the margin, right, or the spacing between this element and other elements, right? And you can control all these things, right? It says that we have not applied any styling over here. We haven't applied any styling, and that's correct. We haven't. Yes. But these are all the styling that down below here. Notice that this is the styling that has been inherited by the default styling imposed by the browser. Okay, so the browser is imposing, certain margins, the font weight, right? It's bold. All right, so this is a default by the user agent, which is your browser, right? We can change this. For instance, I can create a rule saying that I can apply other rules. I can say color, right? And notice that this tool is really cool, right? It understands the various properties that you can change, right? So I can say color, and then notice that it gives me a list of all the colors that are available, right? And as I change, notice that it changes live, right? So it's a live change. So you could web designers use this tool to see, right, how it would look like, right, live if you apply certain rules. Once they like the change, right, these changes are not permanent, right? These are only on the browser. Once you like these changes, you can then copy these rules and make them permanent in the document. Make sense? All right, so I can make it blue. What else is here? I can let's scroll down a little bit. It has a console. The console allows you to debug JavaScript, right, which we'll be doing next week, right? So we can step through code, right, that is running on the browser. We'll do that next week. Those are the elements. Notice at the top you have several tabs. Right, for instance, networking. You can see what are the various documents that were downloaded from the server, right? Up to this point, the only thing that the browser went to the server for, it only went for my HTML document. That's it, right? But very well, this HTML document could be downloading other images. It could be downloading CSS, JavaScript. It could be downloading other things, right? And we would see them listed here, right? The HTML first downloads, and then the browser sees that it's requesting other documents like images and things like that, right? And you would see them listed here. Right now, it only is fetching the CSS. Make sense? Right? All right. I think that's it. Here you can see the each document, its original text representation of the document that was downloaded. So this is the raw HTML that was downloaded, right? Whereas in Elements, it's the parsed interpretation of the document. Okay, it's what it understands. Okay, all right. So for instance, if for instance I forget to close my HTML, right, and I'm a very bad developer and I forget these things, if I refresh, right, notice that the browser parsed it and it was nice enough to close it for me. You see that? Right. So browsers are fairly forgiving, right? And will interpret your documents as, well, maybe this is what you really meant, right? So this is the way it's interpreting your document. You can still look at the original document. The original document did not have a closing H1. See that? Right? You can also view the original HTML that we downloaded by looking at View Page Source. This opens up a separate tab that allows you to see the raw HTML that was downloaded. Okay? Like for instance, when we look at server-side coding, where we have ASPX that has embedded C# and all that, none of that will download here, right? We'll only see the rendering, the resulting HTML, right? That's why for us to be able to keep track of your homeworks, you need to provide us with links to all this server-side technologies that we don't have access to. Yes, we have access to all the HTML stuff and CSS and JavaScript, right? Because that's code that has to download to the client, to the browser, right? But all the server-side stuff, we don't have access to that because we don't have access to your account. We don't have access to your server. Make sense? All right, that's behind a username and password, FTP client that we don't have access to. So whenever you have these assignments that you're providing, you should always provide links to all the files that are all the files that are relevant. Okay, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, ASPX, whatever. Okay. All right, let's keep going. All right, let me fix this. Let me close that. All right, very good. So this is what I'm asking you not to do. There's an attribute here that I can change the style here and say, you know, for instance, right, I was looking at the elements and let me refresh. And I can change the style, right? I really like the color blue. Right? I like that, right? So let me grab that rule. I'll copy it. And I can paste it here. I can say, hey, this hello world, the style that I want to apply to this H1 is right here. I'm hard coding it. I'm telling it this one H1, right? There could be many other H1s, yes? And I like to apply this style. If I refresh now, notice that the change has been made permanent, right? Because I copied it, I pasted it in my HTML, and now I'm refreshing, and now the style is there permanently. Notice that, there it is. See that? It's there. Notice that now, this used to be empty, right? This used to be empty, but now it has downloaded it, and this is the object representation. It's the way it's interpreting it. Yes, you are applying this rule to this one H1. Make sense? Right? The problem with this is that if I have several H1s, and I have here goodbye, right? And I want to apply this style. Notice that I am kind of copy pasting this rule. I want to be consistent, right? We have our UX engineer, we have our guru, styling guru, and this says, well, no, you have to be consistent. All H1s need to be blue. Right, it would make no sense to have one blue, the other red, and it just doesn't look right. So this is the way you do it, right? And notice that this is, what is this? We are repeating ourselves, right? And remember, computer scientists, we are very lazy. We don't want to be repeating ourselves more than once. We like to do do something once and then automate it next time, right? So here we go, and if I refresh that, here's both H1, right? Both are blue, but using the wrong approach. Okay, so I definitely don't want to see this. My style hard coded right on the elements. Okay, and you should avoid doing these things, especially when you go out there and at a job or a co-op, right? Avoid using this. A little better might be that I can declare right here at the head, right? At the head of the document, I can declare a style tag, and what I could do is that I can copy this style and say I want this rule. I want all H1 to have this style, right? Let me copy that. I'll paste it here, and the way we say it, the syntax to say this rule in the style is to use H1 open curly bracket, right? Like that. And now that's a rule that says all H1 have to be color blue. That's what this rule says. Meaning take the entirety of all the document, whenever you see an H1, right? Apply this rule. The color should be blue. Make sense? Right? So now if I take away this styling, if I take away this, it's a little better, right? Instead of saying this over and over and over, I only say it once. Yes? So it's reusable, right? So it's a little better. If I refresh, it's a little better. Notice my H1 and these two H1s don't have the styling anymore. But instead of having this here, it's an element.style refers to any styling that is directly applied right on the element. Yes? Whereas these are rules, right? These are rules that apply to the entire document. Make sense? Right? That are declared in the style tag, the style element. Make sense? And it tells you exactly what line of code it found it. Right? If you click on it, it takes you right to the document. It says, "Yeah, that's it. That's what I parsed. That's the code." Right? So you have, right? It's a very nice tool that allows you to look at your code, right, and see the dependencies between all the source code, which is very nice. Everybody okay? All right. Even better, right? Even better is to, well, actually, before I get there, notice that these rules have what it's called an order of evaluation. Okay, so for instance, if I have here a style, right? If I have a style tag over here and I say style, right? And I say, well, this 1H1 I want it to be red, right? Okay. If I do this again, if I refresh, and notice that what happened here is that all H1 should be blue, but right, the closest style to the elements you are, the more relevant it is, right? It has a higher order of execution, right? Meaning this will override any other stylings that might have been recorded earlier. Make sense? Right? So if I have another H1, right, right, and I refresh, right, all H1s are blue except this one that has an override, right? It's overriding the style from previous declarations. Make sense? Yes.
Would it error out if you have another color in there other than red in the same location?
You mean here?
Yeah. Well, so say I have another line of style. Is there only one line of style?
Like if I say here, no, there's only so this is inline, so you would have, you know, property value semicolon, property value semicolon, and the last one takes precedence. Yes, and from left to right. Everybody okay? All right. All right. So yeah. Well, anyway, we're not going to do this anyway, right? I mean, you would have to have a very convincing reason why to override it, is, you know, at such a down level. Okay. All right. So let's keep going. The better approach, and the one that I am going to require from you, right, is to, instead of having the style tag, you're going to have a separate file. You're going to be declaring this in a separate file. All right, so let's create a new file. Let me see if it lets me create. And will it let me? Style sheet, yes. Okay. I'm going to declare it in a style.css. Okay. The name doesn't matter, you know, as long as I know what it is. But style.css is a very common name. Okay, it's a very common name. And the way it works is that what we do is we're going to move all these rules. We're going to move them out of here, right? We're going to just cut and paste here. Cut and paste. There it is. Oops. Oh, right. Yeah, there it is, right? I copied it here. There it is. And now what we're going to do is we're going to refer to that document. It says, hey, that document is where I have actually no styling here. Instead, it's the problem. If I have a style here, I would have the same problem, right? If several pages have the same styling, I would have the same style tag content just copied and pasted over several pages. Yes, right. Again, a lot of redundancy. And again, if you're taking the database course, if you know, redundancy breeds inconsistency. Yes. We want to remove any redundancy as much as possible, right? That's why, you know, we like to embed things in functions, or right, we like to abstract things, right, and then reuse them over and over. So anyway, so we want to refer to that CSS file that we just created. Yes, right. The way we refer to it is by using the link tag. Okay, and you have to need to say that you are referring to a style sheet, because you can refer to other things other than a style sheet. In this case, we are referring to a style sheet document, and we need to tell it where to find it, right? Now, the style sheet could live locally on our machine, right, which this time it does. Bless you. Right now, the file lives locally on our machine, and notice that it sees it right here. There it is. It sees it. It's giving me the option to refer to that file that lives. It's a sibling to this HTML document. Yes. Right, is that the style sheet you want to load? Yes, that's the one I want to load, and I want to close it. Okay. Notice that the link tag or element doesn't have a body, right? Doesn't have a body, but it is properly terminated. You see that? / greater than. Right? It's properly terminated. Make sense? Right? So what this is going to do is that I'm going to refresh this. I'm going to refresh. And there it is. So it's blue now. How is it being blue? Notice that we can see at the top, right, on the source tab, we see that there are two documents that the browser is aware of, right? It's aware of the HTML document and the style document. If you look at the network, notice that, yeah, it first downloaded the CSS, the HTML file. It parsed it, and it noticed that the HTML file was referring to another document. It says, oh, let me go fetch that. Yes? And it downloaded it. There it is. It downloaded both. First the HTML, and any other documents that the HTML refers to, it downloads them, right? Except, obviously, hyperlinks, right? Hyperlinks are not downloaded, right? Hyperlinks do refer to the documents, but they're loaded when you click on them, right? They're not downloaded right away, whereas images are downloaded right away. Style sheets, JavaScript files, right? Any of those are downloaded so that they can render. Anything that renders right away, it's downloaded. That makes sense, right? If I click on here, if I click on any one of these, it says, it tells me in the network, it says, this is how the browser asked for this document. It says, I created this URL that went to this server, blah, 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 blah. And eventually, this is what the server responded. This is what the server responded, and you can do a preview on the raw that came back. There's a response. Any cookies? Why not? Okay, elements. Notice that here at the top we have head, and notice that it has the title and the link, right? And notice that it knows about the CSS. You see that it has an underline, right? If it didn't find, if for some reason you misspelled it and it couldn't find it, right? This would not be a link. It says, you typed there some document that I can't find. Right? Say I made a mistake, right? And I called it, style 1, right? And I refresh this. I refresh. Notice that the style didn't take. Everything's still black. See that, right? And when I do a look at the head, right? If you click on it, it says it can't find it. It's empty. I can't find that document. All right. So, wait. Oh, did I change it? Yeah, we try to find it and it's empty. There's nothing there. Okay. Here we go. All right. So if I refresh, it's blue. Everybody still with me? Everybody okay? All right. Good. So yeah. So this is what I would expect in your assignments. That you would be linking to your CSS file. Make sense? Right? Now, typically, the CSS is not just one CSS. There might be several CSS documents, right? So typically, the CSS files are put in a dedicated CSS directory. Okay? So let's do that. It's a good practice to put CSS files in their CSS directory. So let's well, we already are in a CSS directory because that's the experiment, right? The experiment is about CSS, right? But I'm going to create another directory here. I might need to stop the server. I'll stop it. So a good practice is to have a separate CSS directory under where you put all your style sheets. Okay, makes sense? Right. Now, this style sheet is going to be shared amongst any files, any HTML files that are inside of this experiment directory. Yes, we're going to share this same style sheet across all these pages. But really, there should be only one CSS file for the entire project, right? Either entire project or entire assignment or entire, any particular context, right? That you're implementing. In your case, I would you can either decide that you want one CSS directory per assignment, yes, or if you want a CSS to go across all assignments, you put that CSS directory a little higher, right, so that each assignment can share the same style sheet. Notice that we moved it, and because we moved it, we have to make sure that we also update our reference, right? This now says you're under a CSS directory. In there, there's a style.css. Yes? I'll refresh. It still works. All right. I'm sure you're familiar with most of these. The style element is a no-no. We're not going to do that. Instead, you're going to do a link. We're going to use the link element instead. Okay? All right. All right. So, right. So a lot of the things that we're going to be working with are, we're going to make fonts of a particular size. We're going to make width and height of a particular size, right? Or margins and paddings, and we have to declare, well, how much of it do we want? How much width do you want? How much height do you want? And there are 4 general ways that you can tell the browser, the units of what you mean. One of them, the easiest, and what many people use is just pixels. Okay? And pixels are what you would expect. It's a single pixel on your screen. Yes. And so, for instance, you might say, "Oh, well, I want a padding of 5 pixels, right? I want a space between my headers or my divs or my sections or articles. I want a 5 to 10 pixel border between them or margin between them." Now, pixels are exactly that. If you have a machine that has much higher resolution, the page will look much smaller, right? Because you can render so many more pixels. Yes, so it does not scale, right? It's a little how many pixels do you want to use. So instead, designers use one of these 2 units, so the EMs or M's, right, and the points. Okay, these are more generic, and what they do is that they do scale. They scale with whatever size of the font it's currently selected, right? If the person starts zooming in or zooming out, right, the whole thing scales out, right? It scales very, very nicely. So, for instance, the standard is that 1 EM is equal to the size of the 12-point font. Okay. So, for instance, the default size of the font that you see when things render is a 12-point font, right? That's the default that the browser will render. And 1 EM scales to that size, 12 points, right? So if, for instance, if somebody zooms in with the mouse or does Control plus or Control minus, right? And the font doubles, right? Then anything that has EMs will double as well, right? It will double as what you need to. So, for instance, if you have 2 EMs, right? 2 EMs means twice on whatever the font size is, right? Point, that's borrowed from print media. 1 point typically means 1/72 of inches. You also can declare percentages. You want the width to be a percentage of the entire screen, right? So that if people start resizing their browsers, things also scale accordingly. So, for instance, one of the things that we might want to do, one of the first things that you might want to do is that override some of the defaults that browsers impose. Right? For instance, when you first come to a page, right? Each browser has a set of defaults. Okay, so for instance, they might render a 5-pixel border, right, around your entire document, even though you didn't ask for it, right? Even though you didn't ask for this margin, right? The browser, in its attempt to make things look pretty, right, it adds this border around. Okay, oftentimes we want to have total control over what the page does. Okay, so we don't want to. And also, this is not consistent across all browsers. Okay, some other browsers might choose another different margin, right? So oftentimes, one page might render one way in one browser, and the same page, right, might render a little bit different in another browser. It's a pain, right? That you went through a lot of effort to make things look consistent across browsers, and nevertheless, each browser is imposing certain aspects to your page. If we hover, if we look at the elements, and oops, sorry. We go head, body. We'll see that, notice that it has already certain values for the body, right? It has already some styles for it. Notice that it imposes an 8-pixel margin around the document, right? Even though we didn't ask for it, right? We are inheriting this from the default styling of the browser, okay? From the style sheet. So notice that we can override this. We can say, well, what would it look like? Oh, it doesn't let you override it here. I can't do it here. The way to override it is to say, hey, the body, what I want for the body really is a margin of 0 pixels. Okay, I don't want any margins, right? I want to control the margin. If I want a margin, I'll ask you for the margin. I will impose the margin myself, instead of relying on the browser, you know, arbitrarily choosing this margin, right? Notice that I can choose. I can see what the margins might look like, so I can override it and see what it would look like. I want 0 pixels. Any padding, if there's any padding, I also want to reset. This is what is called resetting the browser styling. Okay, it's a very common technique. There are some CSS styles that you can include, right? There's some standard reset CSS style sheets that you can download or include in your document that will reset, right? All these stylings, right? They've figured out all the various things that each browser does, yes, and overrides it so that all your pages will render consistently across all browsers. Right, so I'm going to do padding also 0. I'm going to copy that. And I'm going to paste it in my CSS file, in my body. This is a reset. I'm resetting. So I'm going to do a comment here. Resetting inherited body styles, or body styles inherited from browser. Okay. All right. Refresh, and now the body doesn't have anything. Very good. Other things, notice it's pixels, right? PX, the way we abbreviate this unit is by putting PX at the end. Notice that if I take away the PX, right? Notice that if it's not X, it doesn't understand it, and it does not apply the rule, right? It doesn't know what it means. It doesn't know what 0p means, right? It's interpreting it as 0 pixels. It says, I think this is what you mean, 0 pixels, right? There they are. Okay. All right, what else? Go to styling, padding. The box model. So what happens is that each piece of content that gets rendered at the in the browser, it follows what it's called a box model rendering strategy. Notice that if I click on hello, on the right-hand side, notice that it creates for me the box model for that particular hello. Right? If I hover over, right? If I click on it, it says right, that the width and the height, right? The width and the height are 229 wide and 36 pixels high. You see that? Around there's a padding. Right? Notice that it's set to dash, meaning there is no padding. There's absolutely no padding. There is no border, but there is a margin. You see that it highlights on the left-hand side? Yes? And you can control each one of these properties for every single element, right, that gets rendered on the page, right? So for instance, one of the things that we might want to do is, you know, I can change this to 0. I don't want any margin, right? So it removed the margin at the top. I still have some margin at the bottom, right? You can set that to 0. Notice that I removed it. Notice that it's putting it in line. What about this one over here? If I hover over that, it tells me, let's see, it tells me that this one still has a margin, right? Each element, right, inherits this margin, this border, this padding inherits from the browser. The browser is telling all these margins 0, right? And I can override this and see what it might look like. Right? So this strategy of rendering every piece of content, any piece of content that you see on the browser has these properties, right? It has the actual content. There it is, the goodbye world, right? That's the actual content. Which has a width and a height. Yes. Around that there's a padding. Around that there's a border. Around that there's a margin. Make sense? Everybody good? Okay. And that's what is called the box model, right? And you can control each one of these things. Okay, so H1. So let's go back to H1. H1 right now, it's setting the property of the content, right? The color of the text that is in there, right? But I could change other things, right? I could change other things, such as well, let's have a couple other things. I don't know. Let's add some content here, P, and let's grab some content from ipsum lorem, or lorem ipsum, sorry. Let me copy some content, and I'll apply here. There it is. Let me go back to my page, refresh. There it is. That's my page. Notice that if I'm working with the content side by side, and I'm kind of like, struggling to see both content, right? My browser content and my editor on the right hand side. I can ask it to open it in a separate document. I can say, there it is. So it's a separate window. So I can I can now change between them using tabs, right? Alt tabs. Okay. So I can see both sides. Right. So there's my P. There's my paragraph. There it is. The only thing is that, right, I don't as I hover, right, as I hover, notice that there's a paragraph. Notice that there is some margins around it, right? I can change the margins. I think those are margins. Maybe they're padding. Let me see. Yes, you have some margins. You see the margins before and after and whatnot. And I can also see the box model. Yeah, there it is. So they have some margins. So I can change that, right? I can change the margins. I can say I don't want any margins. 0 pixel, right? Wait, over the wait, padding? Huh? Wait a minute. Let me put a border around this. Border color. I can change the border color. Now, border, right? Like the box model says, there's what? There is the content. Around that, there's a padding. Around that, there's the border, and around that, there's the margin. Yes, right? In border, I can change the attribute of the border. What do I want to do with the border? I want to maybe I can say that I want it 10 pixels wide. I want it to be red, and I want it to be solid. There it is. All right, so there it is. So there's the border, right? Now I think it'll be easier for us to understand what's going on with the padding and the margin. Notice that if I increase the padding, remember, the padding is the inner space around the content before the border. Yes? So if I start changing the padding, notice the white spacing that comes between the border and the content. You see that? right? You put it back to 0. And the margin is the space of the entire thing, including the border, from anything else, right? So, for instance, from the border of the window and the hello world above it. So, for instance, if I increase the margin, right, notice that it's moving away from the left-hand side and moving away from the hello at the top. You see that? Okay. So we see what margins and paddings do. So I can change both. I can change the margin and I can increase the padding. See that? Right? And I can increase the border. Increase the border. The border is now 38 pixels wide. You see that? Okay. I can also change the color. Gray. All right, everybody okay? So what is the entire width? What is the entire width? Because when you set the width, right? When you set the width, it's really the width of the content that you're setting. But if you consider what the width is of the entire thing, it's really the width of the margins around it, plus the width of the borders, plus the width of the padding, plus the width of the actual content. You see that? Right? We call the width of the outer thing, of the entire thing, we call that the outer width. You see that? And the width of the actual content, we call that the inner width. Make sense? All right. Borders, let's play around with borders. Now, we use this syntax down here. In this syntax, to change the border, we can provide the various attributes in a single line, right? We can provide the width, the style, and the color right on the same line, right, of the property. Or we can provide them in separate properties, right? We can have a separate border, a color property, style property, width, and whatnot. Okay. All right. So let's try that. Let's try that. Where's our page? There it is. And here is our editor here. We can change the border. Instead of having it in a single line, we can remove that. Remove that. With the border, we can say border color. Right, I want red. Now, this will not take effect unless you tell it how wide do you want your border. Right now, the border width is 0, no border whatsoever. Right, so even though I give it a color, it doesn't display because it has 0 width. Right, so I can change the border. Notice how it has a this editor, right? This live editor. Oops, sorry. Border width. I want it to be 10 pixels. And I still have to tell it it's not enough just a pixel. It needs to know what style do you want. Do you want it dotted? Do you want a solid? Do you want a dot dash dot dash? What do you want? What kind of border do you want? So we can say border style, border style, and then there's dash, there's dotted, there's double border, grooved, right? There's a hidden, inherited initial, inset, none, right? But default is none. Ridge. So these are all the various stylings. Okay, so let's leave it dash, for instance. Okay, make sense? Right. You can also control each individual part of the border, right? Instead of, notice that right now it's setting all the borders all around in the box model, right? The top, the bottom, the left, the right. You can actually be specific about this, right? You can say, well, no, I don't want the color of all the various borders. I want an individual on the left one or the right one or the bottom one, right? So to do that, right? Let's remove all these. Remove all those. You can say border, and now notice that it says bottom or bottom color, right? So meaning I am. Or let's do the top, right? Because or the left. You can say left color, meaning I am controlling only the left color, right? So I want it to be red, and I want to change also the border left style. Oops. Style. I want it to be dotted, and I want the border left and the width to be 50 pixels. that's too much. Okay, there it is. So I'm only changing the border left, right? And that's true for all these, margin, padding, all those, right? So for instance, I can change only the margin for the top, but not the left one. So I can say margin top, right? So notice that it removed the margin from the left, right? Before, it was the margin for all surrounding margins, yes? The top, the bottom, the left, and the right. But when I explicitly say only the top, then all the other ones go back to the default. See that? Right? Same thing with the padding. It says I want to maybe change only the padding on the left, right? I only want the left. That means that all the other ones are going to go back to the default, right? So I'm going to say padding left is 28. So notice that I only have padding on the left-hand side, right? But I don't have padding at the top. You see that? Right? So I remove. So notice that I'm changing the padding. This allows me to do things such as indentation. Make sense? Right? Okay. All right. Borders. Everybody okay with borders, paddings? All right. Text. We can do all sorts of things, such as we can transform text so that we can control text so that it's all uppercase, lowercase. We can change the indentation, white spacing. Like for instance, we don't want it to wrap, right? By default, when there's not enough space, horizontal space, the content wraps. Right? You can override that by using the white space attribute property. Text decoration allows you to underline or overline or line through. And we typically use this property for overriding the way links look. Right, by default, a hyperlink will be underlined, right? So that, just to let you know that it's clickable, right? To give you an idea that it's clickable. Sometimes a more modern implementation is that we use maybe a different color to show that it's clickable, but we don't explicitly put the underline, or maybe we should show the underline only when you hover over the link, right? But we remove the underline otherwise. So we can control that by the text decoration. Align allows you to center, right, left, justify your content. Color, we saw that examples of that. We can change the color of the text. We can transform it. So let's play around with these things. So let's use a text align. So for instance, that paragraph there, let's reload the page. Where is it? It's this one, right? Yeah, we can reload it. And here's our Explorer here. And we can change the way the, what are we going to do? Let's see, wait. With text align, right? So let's look at this. Notice that by default, the text is aligned to the left. See that? Right? Notice that there's some white spaces here, right? We can change that. We can change the paragraph. Right? I'm at the paragraph, and I can change the text align. And I can say instead, actually, let's move this to the bottom. To the bottom. And let's scroll this, and I can say P text align. We can center it, right? Notice that the content now is centered. I can do justify. So notice that it's flush on either side, right? I can do left, which is the default. I can do right, so it's justified to the right, right? Right. What else can we do? We can do underline. So let's do here justified, right? We can do text decoration. We can say that it blinks. I think you can have to set how much you want to blink. A line through, we can set a line through. We can do an overline, so there's a line above it, or underline. Right? Typically, we use that again for hyperlinks. And so let's remove that. Remove that. We'll do that when we get to hyperlinks. What else we have here? We can do color. Obviously, we did that already. Transformation. We can change everything to an uppercase. right? So we can say that transformations we can capitalize. So meaning it capitalizes the first letter of each word. It will be capitalized. We can set the whole thing to uppercase. We can set the whole thing to lowercase, right? We'll change it to say capitalized. What else? Text indent, for instance, if you want like this is the beginning of a paragraph. Typically, you want the first piece of text, right? Like the first sentence to be capitalized. So indent, so here we go. We can set how many pixels we want text to be indented, right? All right, what else? I think that's it. Oh, white space, like for instance, if you want wrapping or not. This is more, for instance, if you're using in tables, where you might want to have a heading on a table. If you don't have enough space, it starts to wrap, and those start to look really ugly. So you might want to force a table element not to wrap, right? If you have any space, just always stay the same. So for instance, here we can this is wrapping, right? The content is wrapping, but we can say white space no wrap. Notice that now the content is too big, but I told it not to wrap. That means that it's just extending to the right hand side, right? All the way across. You see that? I told it not to. All right. Let's see. Fonts. What time is it? It's 1. All right. I think you can play around with these on your own. I want to get to something a little more interesting. Border layout. Okay, first, I like to play with floats. Right. Floats allows you to the default behavior is to render things from left to right, from top to bottom. Yes. And as things flow with the content, things when you don't have enough space, they just wrap around, right? And that's if it's an inline element. Yes. If it's a block element, basically you're just adding more and more space vertically, right? So float allows you to override the way things flow, right? So for instance, you can push things to the right-hand side or to the left-hand side, regardless on how things normally flow, right? And what this allows you to do is something that it's very common in that you want to be able to do is to lay out things horizontally, right? In columns, things side by side, right? And before we used to use tables to do this, right? The first solution was that we want to be able to perhaps break up our content in such a way, right, where you have maybe a top element, a bottom element, and maybe several columns of content, right, with a left sidebar, maybe with a right sidebar, and some content in the middle, right, some main content. So this is a very, very common way of laying out a page. Yes. The problem is that we can't, by default, we can't lay out these 3 columns, right? One of the first solutions that we used to do this is that we would create a table, right, an HTML table, right, where this would be a row, right, these would be 3 rows, and these would be 3 columns in the second row, right? And the first one and last one, right, the top and bottom, would just span across 3 columns. Basically, that's what we did. Okay, and this was very, very common early on, and it has to, has fallen out of favor. This is not the appropriate way of doing it. Do not use table for layout. Okay, do not use tables for layout. It's a very bad practice. Use tables for what they were intended to do. Right, they were intended for tabular data. Right, you want to show things that has rows and columns. Yes, and headings at the top. Not for layout. Instead, for layout, we're going to use the various elements such as header, nav, main, aside, footer, right? And all the others like divs, right? Any block, all those block elements that we introduced last week. And what we're going to do is that following this, we're going to then use CSS to style them so that they will lay out from left to right, from top to bottom. Okay, all right. So let's get to it. All right. So so let's create here another page, and I'll call it border layout. HTML. Here's a border layout. HTML. And in here, we're going to create here an outer. We're going to have a header. I'm going to copy this, right? For time purposes, I'm just going to copy this. Right, everybody okay? Nothing magic about this. If we run this, it's just three lines, right? Header at the top, navigation, main content, aside, and footer. It doesn't look anything like we want to, right? We want to lay this out so that the header is at the top, the footer is at the bottom, and these three in the middle are supposed to be laid out in columns. Make sense? Right? So what we want to do, right? The way we can do this, right, is I'm going to go into style. I'm going to load the style, right? I'm going to load that style over there. So I'm going to say link, rel, style. Oops, sorry, style sheet, and then say href, and then say go into CSS, and then style. There it is. I loaded that style. The style really doesn't have anything. It's not helping me at all. There's nothing there for me to help that can help me, right? It's only doing body and h1. That's all it's doing, right? So if I refresh, notice the difference. I'm gonna make it bigger. Notice that notice what happens. See that? It moved to the left to the right because I removed the 8-pixel border, right? With that in that style, because I don't want it, right? I want to have full control of what I want to do, not what the browser wants me to do. Anyway, I'm not using h1, so that rule is not taking effect. What I want to do is I want to target this header. Okay? I want to target the header, and I want to target that footer. I want to make them a particular size, right? I want to make them a particular size. So how do I do this? Well, here we only saw that we can target an individual elements, right? But we can also target these elements either by ID or, like we'll see in a minute, by class, right? We can target it. If I target the header, it's going to target all headers, right? And maybe that's not what I want to do because an HTML document might have many headers, right? I have this is the main header at the top, but there might be other headers spread out or spread across. Right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I want to target this header that has the ID north. Right? And the way we do that is by I want to refer to that north there, and the way I want to refer to it is to say that it's the ID north. Okay, and the way we say it's the ID is by putting the pound sign in front of it. It's meaning I am targeting elements whose ID is north. Yes, and because ID presumably are unique, there should be only one element whose ID is north. Yes. Okay. What am I doing here? Maybe what I want to do is make the width perhaps. Make it I don't know. Typically, we choose values that are easily divisible by other values, right? Because notice that my layout, right? Or the layout here, right? It seems that we have the width of this. The header and the footer looks like it's the same width, right? Notice that over here, it looks like this is like a third of the size of the header, right? This looks like another third, right? Well, actually, no, right? Because this can't be another third. It looks like this is much bigger, right? Maybe this is a quarter. Right? This is another quarter, and this is like a half of the entire thing, more or less, maybe. Yes? Okay. Let's try with that. Let's choose an easy number for the north. I'll say width 1,000 pixels. I don't know if we have enough space to render that. So we want, what was it called? Border layout? Border. Oh, wait, right here. There it is. Let me refresh. Let's look at the inspection. Let me see. Indeed, if I hover over it, there's 1,000. There it is. All right. Oh, it's too big. It doesn't fit on the page. Okay, that's what you see, the scroll bar at the bottom. See that scroll bar at the bottom? I do not want to see a scroll bar at the bottom in any of your assignments, right, or projects. Okay, you lose points if I see a scroll bar at the bottom, unless you have a very, very convincing reason why to have a scroll bar at the bottom. Okay, make sure that the default rendering does not have a scroll at the bottom. Let me see. Do I have a 960? Can I go up to 960? No, it's too big. Let me go a little down. Let me go maybe to 800. 800 pixels. There we go. But I also so notice that it's this header, right? Just to prove that indeed we are changing the width correctly. Let me change also the background color. I can say background color red. So indeed, I am changing the width. There it is. So it is changing, right? Let me copy that. I'm going to say 800. But I want the footer also to have the same. All right, let me refresh. Let me refresh. Let me put the color. I'm only going to put the color just to make sure that the width is being is changing. So let me refresh. There it is. So it is setting, right? I also want the footer to have the same width. Yes, right? So we're going to do that. We're going to say comma, meaning I also want the following rule, right? It says the footer. I also want the footer to have the same style. Right? This is equal as if I would have copied and pasted this rule twice, right? One for header, one for footer, right? I'm sorry, one for, sorry, not footer. What do I call it? South? South, right? Yeah. If I refresh, now I have the header and the footer at the bottom. Make sense? All right, very good. Now we have to do the other two, right? The left, the middle, and the center, and the right-hand side. And what we want to do here is, let's go back to the border layout. The west, the center, and the east. The way we're going to do this is let's do first the west, right? Let's copy the west. We go to style. I'm going to say west, right? The way we're going to do this is we're going to use the float property. We're going to say, you know what? I want you to go all the way to the left, and anybody else, right? Anybody else around you is just going to flow around you. Okay? That means that if it flows around you, it'll be like the flow of text. How does text flows? From left to right. You know, the one word after another, each character after another, from left to right. Yes? Right? And that's what I want to do. I want you to behave like text does. Flow with the rest of the content. Yes? By default, all these are block elements. Yes? They're block elements. So they add vertical spacing. But by making it float, it takes it out of the flow, right? Out of the normal rendering, and then just pushes it to the left, and everything else flows to the right of it, right? So float left. We'll go float left. So let's refresh this. Notice that the main content now is right next to it. You see that? It kind of went up, right? Right. Same thing with the aside. Let's do. I want to do the same thing with the center, right? I want the center also to flow left so that everything else, including the aside, will come up around it, right? So it flows around it. So let's do also the center. I think it's called center. Center, yes. Right. So center. We're going to do that. There it is. So we have navigation, main, content, and aside all around it. But notice that the footer. Now notice what if the footer was a small footer? Let me bring it down to 200 just for a second, right? Okay. What we want to be able to do is give it enough space and give the width of these guys, right, so that they are somewhat, you know, make sense with the size of everything else, right? So for instance, we're going to give maybe the left-hand side, I don't know, maybe 100 pixels. The right-hand side, another 100 pixels. That's what, 800 minus 200 gives us 600 left for the middle one, right? All right, so let's play around with those values. So the left, the west, and the east, right? I'm going to make the width be 100 pixels. Right? Let me try that. Apparently, it doesn't fit. Now let's change the colors of these things too, because we don't know what's going on here. So background color, gray or beige. What about the main content? What? Oh, you know what? I might want to put this left as well. The east also. East. There it is. All right. So notice that the navigation, the main content, and the aside are side by side. The correct width, 100 and 100 pixels. Yes. But the footer is coming up, right? It's floating. It's going around it, right? It's going around it. What we want to do, right, is say stop the float. Right? I want you to stop the float. I don't want you to float anymore, right? Meaning I want you to go back to your original rendering of blocks, right? Just adding the new line, right? So the way we're going to do that is adding to the north and south. We're going to say clear both. Clear both says stop floating, because you can float left and you can float right, right? Things can be pushed to the right hand side or the left hand side. This says just, I don't care. If you were floating, I want you to stop floating, right? Go back to your original behavior. There it is, right? So footer is now, it's adding the right space. What about this main content? So we're going to give the main content also some width. So let's go to the main. Let's say main, and we're going to say some width. So what's left is what? 600 pixels, right? That's what it's with. Yes.
The north or just the south? You wouldn't clear both?
Yeah, you would say clear left.
Okay.
Yep. Here, so we're going to say 600 pixels, right? And with, oh no, it's not main. What do we call it? Center. Center. Refresh. There it is, right? So notice that it's flush, right? The side is flush. We did our math correctly. I'm just going to change the background color just to make sure that it's rendering. So let's do with light gray. Okay, so that's main content. Yes.
Why was south floating? Because I thought you put floater for.
Yeah, because what happens is that a side was floating, and everything else, right, wraps around it, including footer. Okay. Any text that you put after it starts floating if there's enough space. Tags, anything, images, divs, anything.
Is it before and after or just after?
After. Yep. So there's main content. So that makes sense, right? Are we okay? So now, so we have a starting point for a layout, right? Another thing that is very common to do is to have this centered, right? So somewhat centered. Instead of squished down to the left hand side. Excuse me. To do this, typically we create an additional element around this that wraps the whole thing, right? That we can then apply this centering mechanism, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to use a div, and it's going to be what's called a container. Right, and we're going to put it here at the end. Right now, it doesn't do anything. It's not doing anything. It just has an invisible surrounding grouping of that. And what we're going to do is that container, I wouldn't say container. We're going to say the width, the total width is 800 pixels, right? And we're going to say margin auto. There it is. So there it is. So what it's doing is it says apply margins on either side as needed, right? Just compute it for me so that even if they resize the right, if they resize it, notice that it's always centered. Okay, notice it's always centered. Make sense? Right? That's a very common interview question. You know, how do you center a div, right? Just margin auto, and you have to give it a width. All right, header. Okay, so let's go back to my cheat sheet over here. Where were we? Border layout. So we did that. Border layout. Border layout. Over here, I used a width of 960, right? 960 for the instead of 800, right? Instead of 800, 960 is a very common number. It's a very common width because it evenly divides into 12, right? Meaning that your entire width is 960, and your smallest width, typically, right, would be 1/12 of 960, which is 80, right? And so you could have columns that are of 80 width, right, of width, and then 80, 160, and 240, 400, and 480, and whatnot, right? So you can have columns of various sizes, and that starts off another discussion called what is called a grid system, right? Notice that this one we laid this out, right, by creating our own columns, right? We created this from scratch, right? We wanted these columns to be side by side. Let's give them a particular width, and let's use floating for this, yes? And so every time you would have to create columns, you would have to follow a similar technique, yes? Ideally, you would have this all well thought out in advance, and instead of having to figure out every time, right, you have something that like a boilerplate, right? Or you have like a formula you can just apply, and this will render in the columns, right? Without me having to think about these things. Make sense? Right? To do that, we're going to implement what is called a grid system, right? Let's implement a grid system. Okay. I'm jumping over lists, but you can look this out on your own pace. I like to go and look at grid system. We need to look a little bit about a grid system because it's going to be the basis of understanding Bootstrap, starting I think on Thursday. It might spill over to next week though. So let's look at this grid system. So the grid system, it says, instead of me having to think about these columns, right, and having to think about floating and all this, right, can I create a system, right, that I could just tell a div or a header or a nav that I want you to be a column. That's all. Just be a column. Do whatever you need to do to be a column, right? Instead of me having to think about this every time. So the idea is that we're going to split up the content of the page into any number of rows, right? So you're going to have any number of rows, and then within each row, right, we're going to create a styling that will allow us to break up and apply a particular width to that element, so that if it's 960, then column 1, that's the smallest, right? It'll be the smallest indivisible piece, 80 pixels, for instance. So that means that if you put a whole bunch of column 1s right next to each other, right, they will all add up to 960. Yes. And notice that there's how many columns in total? There's 12. See that? And why 12? Not for any particular historical or religious reasons. It's a number that nicely divides, right, into lots of different other numbers, right? I can divide it by, certainly divided by 1, and there's 12 columns, right? I can divide it by 2, so I have, things are here, that takes up 2 columns, so that'll be 160 pixels, right? I can divide it by 3s, I can divide it by 4s, I can divide it by 6s, right? And then I can combine these, right? I can combine all these columns together so that, for instance, I can combine, something that takes up 7 columns, combine it with something that takes 5 columns, right? And that adds up to my 12, total 12. That makes sense, right? I can have all 1s, right? Or I can have 12 and then 10, right? Like over here. Here I have 10, and then and a 2 at the bottom right after it, right? Yes? Now, how would you implement each one of these? How would you implement? Using float, right? You would use float to do this, right? You would have an outer div that would allow you to declare a row, and then within that, you can have any number of columns. You know, if you paint an element with column 1, the width will be 80. If you paint it with column 2, it will be 160, right? And so on and so forth. Yes? So let's try it out. Let's try it out. So let me create here. How's the pace? Is the pace okay? Am I going too fast? I think a lot of the other styling, you know, it's pretty simple. I think you should be able to figure it out. Just following along. All right, let me add here another page, and I'll call it grid. And we won't be able to do much here. That's only 10 minutes left. So let's call this grid. I'm going to copy. I'm going to go into my style. Right, I'm going to copy the link to the style. Right, into my grid HTML. And in the body, what I'm going to do, right, to implement this, I'm going to first declare a row. Right, a row is going to say, I add a new line. Right, I grow vertically. Yes, right, meaning that if there were any floats, I don't want them anymore. Okay, and we're starting a brand new row, a brand new vertical spacing. Yes. All right, so we're going to declare a row. Now, notice that, oops, I'm going to go to the end. Notice that I'm using here a dot. You see that dot? Yeah, dot, as opposed to the pound sign. Now, pound sign is for if you have an element that has an ID, right? You're saying, oh, it's that particular one that has that ID. This one says, you know, what if this one is only applicable to a single element, right? Because it's an ID, right? There can't be another element with the same ID. That makes no sense. But what if I want to reuse that, right? I want to reuse that styling over and over, right? That's a great styling. Well, instead of applying the ID to the element, we can use a class and say, you know, all elements who have the class row, right, will this rule will apply to all elements with the class row, okay, which we'll do in a second. And the next one, we're going to have all the columns, column 1, all the columns, float left, right? That's how they're going to be implemented, right? All the divs, any div that has a class of column 1 or column 2 or column whatever, right? They're all going to float left. Yes. The only difference is that column 1 is going to be a little smaller than column 2, right? And column 3 is going to be a little bigger, and column 3 to 4 is going to be bigger, and so on and so forth. That's the only thing that is different, but they all float left, right? That's how they stack from left to right. Make sense? So I'm going to copy that in my style. Oops. There it is. And finally, so let's look at, let's see how we can play around with it, right? So let's go to the grid, and let's create here. Well, we want the container, right? We want the same container that we had, so we're gonna say div ID container, right? That's takes up what, 800 pixels, right? 800 pixels. Well, that's not divisible by 12, is it? 800 divided by 12, what's that? 800 divided by 12. It's 66. It's like 67, 66.666. So let's go down a little further, and let's go with, say, 65 times 12. We'll give 780. Okay, so instead of choosing 800, let's use 780. Yes, knowing that there's some 20 pixels off somewhere there. Okay. All right, so let's choose that. The smallest will be 65 pixels. Yes, that's column 1. Are we okay? So let's create here a row, div, and there's going to be a row, class row. So what's that going to do? This is going to be this rule here, right? This rule will apply to that row. Yes, and I can have any number of rows. Here's a row, here's another row, another row, another row. Yes. If I want to have lots of rows, right? And then inside, I might want to have several columns. Right? So for instance, let's do here's another div, right? And here's class column 1. Column 1. Let's refresh this. Let's run this. And this is what it's called. What's it called? Grid, right? Grid. There's column 1. Column 1. And if I have lots of column 1s, right? Lots of these. So and this one would be maybe column 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I have 7 columns. They all stack one after another. Yes? Right, because they're floating. Right? And how many should I be able to have? Well, according to the grid system, they should all add up to the total amount of the row around it, right? All right, so we say that the row is going to be of size 780, right? So the row is going to be the width, going to be 780 pixels. And now we're going to say that column 1, right, is going to have a width of 65, right? Is that what we said? 780 divided by 12, right? So let's refresh this. Notice that they all now they start to have a width, right? They have to have a width. And notice that if we keep adding content, right? So a couple more so 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, right? So that's oops. So this is 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, right? And I refresh. Oops, I must have, okay, then close that. There it is. There's my 12 columns, right, going across. Okay? Or I might have columns of size, so 65 times 2. So columns that are column 2, right, are twice as big. Yes, so I can go and create my own column 2. I can say dot column 2 the width is twice as much, is 130 pixels, and in the grid here are I'm going to copy one of these, and that's going to be column 2. And how many of those I'm going to have? I'm going to have 6 of them, right? So half of them, right? So column 1, or let me just take out the 1 so I can just add it. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right. So now notice that exactly what's happening, right? These are stacking up together. I don't have to think about, right? Floating and all this, right? It's already set. It allows me to think in terms of rows and columns. You see that? It allows me to think in terms of a table, right? Which we can't use tables, right? But we can still think as if these were tables, right? Rows and columns, correct? We just have to use these standard widths, right, that allows you to add up and make sure that everything adds up together and everything's flush, right? I'm going to do obviously I can combine these, right? I can have well, I already have a row, so I can have several of 1. So here's column 1, and then column 2. That's what? That's up to what, 3? So how many of those would I have? I would have 4, no? So 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's, one of them will be 65 and the other one will be 130, right? One will be twice as big. So this will be column 1. Oops. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8. Oh, 8? Yeah, 4 of 2, that 8. Okay, yeah. All right, so if I refresh, notice that this one is half of this, right? And then this is half of that. You see that? Right, the space that it's taking up. That makes sense, right? So this is the basis of grid systems in general, right? Now that you understand the grid system, you're not going to have to implement it. Right? What we're going to give you is a working grid system. Right? Bootstrap, which we'll be starting to look at either Thursday or next week, right, builds on this idea of the grid system. And now you know what's behind the scenes, right? Because we just created it, right? We just built it. Now that you understand what's happening behind the scenes, you can use a real grid system. All right? All right, thank you. I will be here till 3 o'clock in my office if you want to come and chat. All right, if you have any questions or you need one-on-one, if you can't FTP or you have you're having problem with your server, please come see me. I'll be there till 3 o'clock. All right? Thank you.
I thought you got off for 67.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, that's how 67.
No, not today. No, I'm not going to be able to do that on Tuesdays. I thought I was.